Hello and bonjour. You're watching Power Dilemmas with Sarah Bokhari at TAG TV. Folks, Bill C6 has recently received royal assent, and Bill C6 was a Canadian Citizenship Act, and now after receiving royal assent, it is a new Canadian immigration law. According to this law, things have become very easy for new immigrants. The good point about is that the new immigrants can apply for citizenship earlier than previously. So to talk about this, the new changes in Canadian Citizenship Act, to talk about how it is affecting security, to talk about how many years permanent residents could stay in Canada to get citizenship, we have our very important guest today, Chantal Delage. Chantal is an immigration lawyer and is a regular commentator with CTV and other mainstream TV shows in Canada. Welcome to my show, Chantal. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing well, thanks.
Thank you very much for coming all the way from downtown Toronto.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I will be asking you the first question connected to that applicants were supposed to be physically in Canada 4 out of 6 years prior to this law. What is the situation right now? What are the new requirements under the Canadian citizenship law?
Well, there are a number of changes that have been made, but the main one, of course, is the physical presence residency obligation. So before the Conservative government came to power, the rule used to be that you had to live in Canada, you had to reside here for 3 out of 4 years. The Conservatives then changed it to 4 out of 6 years in order to make it a little bit extra time that you had to spend in this country in order to be considered qualified for citizenship. Now the Liberal government has changed it to 3 out of 5 years. So it's gone from 3 out of 4 to 4 out of 6, now to 3 out of 5. So that has made it easier for a number of people to be able to qualify for citizenship. Another one of the major changes is that some people who have been in Canada before becoming a permanent resident, for example, suppose you were a foreign student or a temporary foreign worker, some of those individuals can count some of that time towards their 3 out of 5 years requirement. So their pre-PR time, some of it can be counted. The other major change is that the age range for having to pass the language test and the knowledge test about Canada has been minimized. So now if you're over the age of 55, for example, you no longer have to pass those tests. It used to be 65, now it's 55.
As well as connected to the age, before it was 14 years, now it's 18 years. So what are the underlying reasons behind that, and what's going on?
Well, I think it's largely an ideological difference. Under the Conservative government, the feeling was, children who are under the age of 18, I mean between 14 and 18, are certainly capable to learn about Canada's legal systems and Canada's history and should be able to pass the test. And likewise, people over the age of 55, just because you turn 55, it doesn't mean you stop learning or you can't learn anything anymore. So the Liberals, what they've been doing is making it a little bit easier because, some people who are under the age of 18 or over the age of 55 might have a little bit more difficulty to pass that knowledge test and the English test. I mean, for example, suppose you sponsor your parents and your parents are 60 years of age. Sometimes when you get a little bit older, it's harder to learn a new language. So they're exempting more people from that requirement.
Okay, so connected to being present in Canada 4 out of 6 years, how about filing the income taxes? Because the previous requirement was that you have to file your taxes 4 out of 6 years, right?
Yeah.
So what is the present requirement now?
Well, you simply have to show that if you were required to file taxes, that you did so within the time frame that they're asking you for. So it's no longer 6 years. Now they're only looking at a 5-year time frame. For example, if you were living overseas for 1 or 2 of those 5 years, you might still meet the 3 out of 5 year requirement, but you may not have been required to file taxes. So there's some flexibility there.
Okay. So, Ms., you have just, given an introduction to, how many years a person should be residing in Canada and how it has now been reduced to a different set of years. This is a Liberal government. This is a decision under the Liberal government. So the previous decisions by the Conservative government, what is their status?
Well, so the provisions basically only affect people who are applying under the new law. If you applied before this law came into effect, you're still considered under the old rules. So if you applied under the 4 out of 6, you're still subject to the 4 out of 6. It doesn't become easier for you. It only affects the people who are applying now under the new regime.
Okay, so whoever applied before 2015 will still be affected by whatever the laws presented by the Conservatives. This is what you mean?
Right. So, well, there are 3 different regimes, right? There was the original one, which is the 3 out of 4. Most of those cases have now worked their way through the system. There aren't very many of those left. But if you applied during that time, then you would still be subject to that law. If you applied under the Conservative law, 4 out of 6, then those are the rules that will apply to you. And if you apply under the new one, 2017, then the 3 out of 5 years will apply to you. So it sounds confusing, but it's actually not that confusing if you have an application. It's just whatever was in force at the time you applied, those are the rules that apply to you.
I'm just going to read a statement under this the changes in the Act. The previous act was that the minister was the decision maker for most cases of citizenship revocation on the grounds of false representation, fraud, or knowingly concealing material circumstances. The federal court was the decision maker for citizenship revocation cases involving false representation, fraud, or knowingly concealing material circumstances related to security, human or international right violations, and organized criminality. What is the new situation under this previous act?
Right, so basically now everybody who is getting a revocation has a right to go to the federal court and challenge that decision. Under the Conservative government, there was a lot more power vested in the hands of the minister. And now, again, it's an ideological difference. I mean, about how many levels of appeal a person should get, how much room should they have to challenge a decision. So again, the Liberal government has been all about making that a little bit more flexible. And I mean, people who are reasonable can sit on either side of that divide. I mean, I can see people on the side that would say, no, it should be harder to get Canadian citizenship because it is a valuable thing. We shouldn't just pass it out to everybody. You should have to really make an effort in order to become a Canadian. I can see that way of thinking. I can also see the way of thinking that, look, you know, if people are going to be living here, what is the value in keeping them out of the Canadian citizenship umbrella? What is the value in not letting them have a Canadian passport? What is the value in not letting them vote? I mean, if they're living here and long term they want to settle down here, why shouldn't we make it as easy as possible?
So it looks like Canadian citizenship has become very easy under this new amendment. How do you connect it to the security of Canada? Isn't it that we are inviting everyone to live in Canada? How is it going to affect Canadian security?
I don't think it does affect Canadian security, really, because keep in mind that people who are applying for citizenship, these are already people who have passed through the system to become permanent residents. And they've gone through all the necessary security checks that everyone has to go through to become a PR in the first place. So by the time they get to citizenship, they've already passed through that process and they've been living here for a number of years. And they obviously have not acquired a criminal record, because if you do have a criminal record within that period of time, you're not eligible to apply for citizenship after that. So if they pass through security checks and they have a clean criminal record in Canada, really, I mean, when you go for citizenship, it's just an extension of that. So when you go for citizenship, you have to also do another security check. You have to do fingerprints, and you also have to provide a police certificate for any country where you may have lived for more than 6 months within that 5-year time frame. So, for example, if I've gone to Turkey and lived there for 6 months, I need to provide a police certificate from Turkey. So I think it's pretty secure. I don't feel like it's been, you know, in any way made easier in that respect. Just easier in terms of meeting the requirements, but not security-wise.
Okay. Now, diverting the attention to refugees from Syria and other war-torn countries, what is the government's policy on getting more refugees in Canada, and is the permission of allowing refugees connected to security issues in Canada?
Right. So interestingly, over the past year, the number of refugees coming into Canada has dropped quite a bit. There was a big increase, of course, as you remember, in the winter of 2015, going into the beginning of 2016. There was an enormous influx of refugees at that time brought in under a special government program. After that program was finished, they scaled it back significantly. So the numbers now are a fraction of what they were before. A lot of people that escapes notice, because the influx that happened over a year ago is still very fresh in people's minds. But actually, it's been scaled back quite a bit over the past year. Security-wise, again, all refugees that come into Canada they have to pass a security screening. It's both at the police level, meaning RCMP and regular police level for criminality, but also security investigation like CSIS checks as well. So they do background investigations on people to check out where they lived, where they went to school, where they worked, in order to just make sure, even if they don't have a criminal record, that they don't have any connection to groups that might be violent or terrorist organizations, for example. And I think, to be honest with you, it's about the best that we can do. There is no security system in the world that is ever going to be perfect. There's just no way that you could ever have a system like that. So I think it's probably about the best that we can do with the technology and the way that the world is right now.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Quebec policy in getting more immigrants. Are they different from the rest of Canada, or they have their own system?
Yeah, they do. So most of the provinces of Canada have an agreement with the federal government to some degree to be able to have some control over selection of immigrants destined to their province. Quebec is a little bit different because, well, first of all, their system is legislated differently, and also they have exclusive control over immigration of people into their province, whereas the other provinces only can select a portion of them. Quebec has complete selection control over their immigrants.
Okay.
So their system is quite a bit different than ours. But interestingly, over the past few years, the federal system has been more and more modeling itself on the Quebec system of selection. Because Quebec, it has always been the case that they placed a very high emphasis on French language skills and a very high emphasis on young age. Because, of course, the idea is demographics, right? We want more French-speaking people, and we want younger people because our birth rate is so low. We want people in the demographic age where they're going to be having children. And it used to be that the federal policy was a little bit more relaxed in that regard, but now it's actually a lot closer to the Quebec system.
Okay, so according to the new the changes in law, everyone has to know French, or it's okay that they can just know one national language?
Right, so federally, you have the choice of what you want to be your main official language. So you can say that English or French is your stronger one, and that one counts for more points. But you also get points if you speak the second one. So in the federal system, if you are bilingual English and French, it boosts up your score significantly. So your chances of passing and getting immigration are a lot greater. In Quebec, they also score you on French and English, but of course the French is weighted a lot more heavily. So there are more points accorded for French skill than for English skill, but they still do pay attention to both. Now, because it's a point-based system, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have excellent language skills in order to pass, but if you don't, then you need to make up those points in another category. For example, maybe you have a PhD or a master's, so you get extra points there, so you can afford for your language to go down a bit.
Okay, how about Saskatchewan? How is it taking in the new changes in Canadian law, Canadian immigration law?
Right, so a lot of the Canadian provinces, as I mentioned, they do have a means of selecting some of the immigrants that are destined to their province. So I can still apply under the federal system and decide that I want to go, anywhere in Canada that I want to, other than Quebec, because I have to pass their system if I want to go there. But if I don't, for whatever reason, pass in the federal system, I could look at those provincial categories. And Saskatchewan, for example, has their own means of selection. So they have one that's connected to job offers. If a Saskatchewan employer wants to invite a foreign worker to settle in the province of Saskatchewan, the rules are a bit different than federally. They have an agricultural program. They have an entrepreneurship program where if you're going to open a business in that province, the rules are a bit different. So every single province has a different program with different rules. But keeping in mind that anybody who wants to apply federally under the federal skilled worker, for example, you can always still do that. It just gives you another means to be able to pass.
So new immigrants who are applying to become Canadian citizens, which province should they apply for?
It totally depends on the person's profile.
Okay.
So, for example, if they've owned and operated a business before, you know, there are business programs in some of the provinces, but not all of them. For example, Alberta has never had an entrepreneurship program, so that wouldn't be a province of destination. Now, if you were to look at some of the smaller provinces, the criteria for business people is a bit more relaxed. Like the amount of investment that you have to put in, it's a little bit lower. If you want to go somewhere like British Columbia, you know, a very attractive province where a lot of people, they want to go there anyway and the demand is higher, then the amount of investment is also higher. But each individual province makes their program to suit the local needs of what is there at that time. So Prince Edward Island, what they need is totally different from what they need in Manitoba. So the rules would be different. What I would usually do is I don't start with the program, I start with the person. So I look at what's your education, you know, do you have any family living anywhere in Canada? Oh, you have a relative in Manitoba? Okay, well maybe we look there. Have you run a business? How much is your net worth? Right? If you have $500,000 compared to $2 million, that's going to affect the range of selection that you have for provinces.
So again, I'm just going back, my mind just keeps going back to the Conservative government, because I interviewed at that time Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, Chris Alexander, and he was talking about some biometric measures. So my question would be the things or the system, modus operandi erected by the Conservatives, is it still working under the Liberal government?
Yeah, it definitely is. So
for screening and for
exactly
assessing the new immigrants?
Yes, for new immigrants and even for people who are visiting Canada. So under that system, which is still in effect now, you have to go for biometric screening when you make an application to Canada.
Okay.
So you have to go into a special office and they do a screening of you, which I think involves, if I'm not mistaken, fingerprints and possibly a retina scan, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, yeah.
And everybody has to do that in order when they apply for their visa. So it's just another security measure, and it's still being used now.
Okay, wonderful. Chantal, any additional message you want to give it to the viewers of Power Dilemmas at TAC TV?
Well, I guess my only piece of advice would be with regard to citizenship. I meet a lot of people that for whatever reason they put off or postpone applying for their citizenship. They were, you know, some people just a little bit lazy, didn't get around to it or didn't put their mind to it. But it really is a good idea to apply sooner rather than later, because the citizenship process can take a long time. And sometimes things happen in life that you wouldn't expect. I mean, your PR can be taken away from you under certain circumstances. For example, suppose I'm living in Canada for 30 years and then I get a job in Dubai and I'm working overseas for 5 years in Dubai. Well, you know, I might lose my permanent residence because I've failed to meet my residency obligation. Whereas if I have my Canadian citizenship already, it gives me that freedom to know that it's never going to be taken away from me unless I obtained it by fraud. So whatever happens in your life after that, you can rest easy that your citizenship and your status in Canada is secure. So sooner rather than later.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for coming to my show, Chantal, and we will love to have you again. And with this, folks, I would like to assert my point that Canadian citizenship is a privilege. Use this privilege very cautiously. We all love Canada. With this, we will see you next time. Ciao.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAC TV.